I'm almost 44. These are experiences that I had as a teenager in the greater Nashville area that all seem related. 2 of them happened in the daytime, and 1 happened at night. 1 was witnessed by a friend, 1 was not witnessed by anyone else, and 1 was witnessed by my brother, but he doesn't remember. I would really appreciate any real insight or interpretation of these experiences individually or as a whole. I've tried to be as detailed as possible and can provide more specific location details if there's a good reason. In 1995 I was a teenager in Nashville, Tennessee. My mother was taking me to a track summer camp, and I think it was Wednesday. It was around 12 p.m. as the session started at 1 p.m. She was driving and we were listening to classical music. She pulled out of the driveway and we were driving down the road to Lebanon Road. We were on the road toward Lebanon Road for about 10 seconds, and as she drove into a dip, I looked up through the windshield and saw 3 triangle-shaped ships that were maybe a 200 or 300 feet above the trees. The 3 ships were flying in a triangle formation. They had a circle in the middle that looked glassy, and the sides of the ships were beveled. I was shocked, and kind of terrified. My mother was focused on the road, and I told her to look up and I told her what I was seeing. The ships were moving pretty fast but didn't make any sound whatsoever. It looked like a sci-fi movie. By the time she looked up and because of how the hills rose, she didn't see them. I told her about them, and she said a prayer. She's a very religious person. I went to the track session, and just couldn't stop thinking about it. I was trying to figure out what I saw, while doing track exercises and conditioning. I didn't tell anyone, I've only told a handful of people ever, because I understand how it sounds. A year or so later in the summer, I was at a friend's house in Mt. Juliet, a city near Nashville, and we decided to go to downtown Nashville. It was a hot summer day and I was driving. We left his parents' trailer and were driving toward Lebanon Road. We were driving towards a very large hill, and I saw a butterfly at the top just sitting on the top of the big hill in our lane, with its wings spread, but it wasn't moving. I thought this was very strange, because it was so hot out and I liked to study animals and insects when I was younger, so I knew a butterfly wouldn't normally be out in the sun not moving on a road. I pointed it out to him, and we pulled over to look at it. He thought it was strange too. We got out of the car and walked over and began looking at it. It wasn't moving in any way, but looked healthy. I couldn't understand why it was sitting there. I began looking around at the hills, and houses in the distance, and the tree lines to our right to see if there was some environmental reason, like tree sap on the butterfly's pads, or fresh tar that someone might have used for their driveway, or just anything that could potentially explain it. I began looking at the sky. It was bright sunny day, with a few wispy white clouds around. In the distance of the direction the butterfly was facing, was an almost imperceptible silver tube in the sky. It looked like it was a couple of miles away and high in the sky. I looked at it for 30 or so seconds, just to be sure of what I was seeing, and that it wasn't a trick of the atmosphere. It was there and it wasn't moving either. I asked my friend to come over and I pointed it out to him. He looked at it for 15 seconds, and then he got very scared, and said, "We've got to get out of here now," or something to that effect. I didn't understand why he was scared. He walked quickly to the car and got in, and began pleading with me for us to leave. I looked at it for another 15 seconds or so, and back at the butterfly, and I didn't want him to be scared, even though I wasn't at all, in any way, so I got in the car and we drove off. We talked about it a little bit that day, and a few times after that, and he was always very scared about even talking about it. It was very odd, but there wasn't any reason to be afraid, to me. In 1997 I was sleeping in a spare room my parents had built a few years before. It had huge windows and faced a neighbor's house across the street. I was asleep on the couch facing the window and it was sometime around 3 a.m. All of a sudden, my eyes just opened and I was looking through the window into the sky at some star. It wasn't super bright. After my eyes shot open, I felt an electrical kind of energy in every part of my body. I was not scared, but it felt irregular, and strange, but not bad. All of this happened within 2 to 3 seconds, and I was lying there, staring at this star wondering, why am I awake and why do I have this feeling in my body? Immediately after thinking that, I heard a quiet voice inside my head that said, "We're not from here, you're not from here." That's literally what the voice said in my head. I don't have any mental problems for the record. I tried to dismiss it as just some weird thing, and I turned over facing the back of the couch to go back to sleep, but I couldn't, because the electric feeling in my body felt like it was growing. I still tried to dismiss it, and laid there for a few minutes with my eyes closed. I then started to feel a strange presence in the room, which I also tried to dismiss as my mind being overactive or something. Now, both feelings wouldn't go away and I turned back over and looked around the room. It looked like there was dark purple and blackish figure that was translucent standing in the corner, and the top of its head, which looked like it had a hood that was the same general coloration, went through the ceiling. I sat up and looked at it, and it didn't move, and I couldn't shake the electrical feeling, and was really wondering what was going on, and why had I heard this voice in my head, and opened my eyes to see a star that I had no idea what star or constellation it was in. I decided that this was all some weird anomalous thing, and that I should just get a drink of water. I left the room, passing within a foot or two of this translucent thing in the corner. I was just dismissing it all, because it didn't make any sense. I walked through the living room into the kitchen, grabbed a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water while I looked at the clock on the counter, which said 3 a.m. something. I drank a glass of water, and refilled it. Then I turned to the right, trying to get rid of the energized feeling, and I saw my brother sitting at the computer at the end of the kitchen. He wasn't moving and was just sitting at the computer like he was frozen or something. It was odd, because his eyes were open. I said his name, and when I did, he very slowly and oddly tilted his head back, and his eyes were rolling back in his head. After doing this, he moved it back to the position it was in again, eyes open staring at the computer, not moving. I said his name again, and he did the same thing again. At this point, I was terrified, though I hadn't been before. I walked over to him, and put my hand on his shoulder firmly and said, "What are you doing? Are you okay?" I was very concerned, and also upset, and concerned for him. I thought maybe he needed to go to the hospital or something. He acted very strangely, and turned his head slowly toward me and said, "I'm just tired," or something like that, but it wasn't his normal cadence, and he was moving in a weirdly slow way that didn't make any sense even for an extremely tired person. He turned his head back to the computer the exact same way as before. At this point, I was frustrated and angry with him, and the situation overall, because it didn't seem like him, and all of this was too odd. I said, "Okay, then you need to get up and go to bed," and I shook him a bit harder. He turned his head slowly toward and said something like, "Okay, I will," and then turned his head back. I decided to just leave him there, because I also thought maybe he was watching adult videos on the dial-up internet, but that still didn't explain why he was acting that way. I went back to the room and put the water glass on the coffee table, and sat there for a bit, and just thought about the whole thing. I eventually went back to sleep, and that thing was still in the corner. I just didn't think any of it meant anything, and that maybe it was all just me. My brother did not remember that night all when I talked to him the next day. I'm sure I brought it up to him a few more times, but he didn't remember. There are a few other things that happened, and all of these kinds of things pretty much stopped happening to me when I was 23, and I'm glad about it, just because I don't know what to think really. As noted, I've only ever told a handful of people I really trust about these things, because I know how it sounds. There's maybe a dozen other of these kinds of things that ever happened to me.